Hello, everyone, and welcome back to my digital camp meeting seminar. My name is Matthew Lucio. I pastor in Peoria, Illinois. And this seminar is entitled Acts, Athens, and Apologetics. This right here, right now, is the final part, part 3. Now, the focus of our time together is to discover principles of proclaiming the gospel in a post-Christian world. Now, we've been talking about the need to embrace a changing world, just as Paul embraced the way his world changed when he went from Antioch to Athens. And so we need to embrace this cultural shift we've undergone, taking us from Christendom to post-Christendom or post-Christianity. And yesterday we talked about how Paul placed himself in a position where he could be found by the people that he was looking for. And this is a point I didn't make, but probably should have. And that is that Paul didn't barge into their meeting in the Areopagus. He was invited. He didn't shove his message down anyone's throat. He was out there in the market for days speaking before he was invited to a meeting, and that shows respect. We'll talk about that a little bit more as we go on in this presentation. When we got to the ingredients of Paul's sermon yesterday, we talked about 3 parts of his sermon. First, he met his audience where they were and disarmed them by complimenting them in a way that they would value. Paul did this simply by appreciating their piety and respect towards the gods. Okay, now number 2. Paul built a bridge to them by entering their world view, and he did this by saying that the unknown God they worshipped was the God he had come to make known to them. And finally, number 3, Paul painted a beautiful and compelling picture of God, something that they would be drawn to. He told them that this God didn't need temples or human beings to feed them. Rather, this God is a giver, not a taker. And he made human beings not to serve him, but to know him. We are his children, so we don't need these idols to give us the approximation, the image of God anymore. Rather, we are created in his image. That's why we don't need idols. Paul doesn't trash their idols. He simply says they're old-fashioned, out of date, insufficient, a thing of the past. Attacking the idols head-on will only make his audience defensive, but suggesting that they are no longer needed, that they're obsolete, well, hey, everybody wants to keep up with the times, right? Nobody wants to be left behind. So he left it up to them to make that decision, right? You feel, oh man, are these idols behind the time? I guess maybe we should move on. Anyways, in this final part of our look at Paul in Athens, we're going to begin by covering that 4th and final principle of Paul's sermon in Athens. Then we're going to do some application of these principles for the world in which we live. And I'm going to call this lecture, this final lecture, Evangelistic Veggie Meat. That doesn't get you hungry. I don't know what will. Hey, it's after lunch. You should have had some already. Anyways, so the 4th step in Paul's sermon is to explain the urgency of this information he's giving them. Paul has broken through the walls. He's built the bridge. He's painted a compelling picture of God, something to tempt them to cross the bridge and join him. And there's only one thing left to do, to explain the urgency, the reason why you need to cross this bridge now, the reason why they should choose to embrace this unknown God who wants to be known. Well, how did Paul do it? How did he explain the urgency? How did he make his appeal? Well, join me in verse 29 of Acts 17 and see for yourself. This is what we find there. Therefore, since we are God's offspring, we should not think that the divine being is like gold or silver or stone, an image made by human design and skill. In the past, God overlooked such ignorance, but now he commands all people everywhere to repent, for he has set a day when he will judge the world with justice by the man he has appointed. He has given proof of this to everyone by raising him from the dead. We've now come full circle. This whole story began with Paul getting upset by all of the idols in the city of Athens, and now he stands before some thought leaders, these custodians of Greek religion, and he's suggesting to them, he's telling them that worshiping idols is now wrong. He's just dropped the hammer out of nowhere. This sermon is so artful. He just tiptoes into it, complimenting his audience and wading into philosophical waters, and then boom! Here comes the point. You guys don't need to worship the images of the gods anymore because you yourself have been created in the image of God. Boom! Drop that mic, Paul. Boom! Look, if Paul would have ended his sermon there, we might have said he made a good case. He wasn't judgmental. He was gentle, kind, persuasive. and his audience might have politely thanked him for sharing his thoughts and said they'd think about them sometime. Paul has to emphasize, however, the importance of making a decision now, to take what he is saying seriously. So he tells them that now that they know the unknown God, this unknown God expects them to stop worshiping idols. Okay, well, who cares what he thinks, right? Well, you should care because there's a day of judgment coming. Okay, well, how do we really know about that? How do we know what's going to happen on this day of judgment? You should know because this God appointed a man as judge, and to prove it, he has raised this man from the dead. Now, there's a lot to unpack here. Paul's sermon goes from baby steps to really specific and really doctrinal in a hurry, doesn't it? But let's unpack a little bit of what just happened. Okay, the Greeks had many gods, some more powerful than others, and I think Paul was trying to prevent the Greeks from taking this unknown God, Paul's God, and just absorbing him into their pantheon, into their system, where he will be lost as one among many. No, Paul has to somehow make the case that this God isn't just one God among many. He is special. He is unique. And to accept this God is therefore to reject all of the others. And Paul makes this choice as easy as he possibly can. This is your creator. This is the one who provides for you. And this is the one who will judge the world. Do you even need another God? Right? This God does it all. Now, in the past, Paul tells them God has overlooked such ignorance, but now he wants people to repent. Now is the operative, interesting word in this sentence. I think it's interesting that Paul positions Christianity as the progressive new thing. Your gods are all yesterday's news. This true God was speaking through your poets to tell you this, to tell you about this day that has now come. And it's time to get on board with this new thing God is doing in the world. Well, upon what basis is Paul telling the council that idolatry is now wrong? 2 words, present truth. Of course, Paul doesn't use those precise words, but that's the idea here, right? You didn't know the true God, and now you do. And through Jesus, this true God is doing new things in the world. So let's get with the program. Leave your blind traditions behind and join this new movement. You used to be ignorant, but now you know. You once worshiped the unknown God, but now you have an opportunity to worship the known God. We're so used today, I think, to Christianity being told that it's old news, it's regressive, it's backwards, that it's hard for us to conceive that there was ever a time that what Christians were doing in the world was progressive, was forward-thinking, was socially and theologically disruptive, which is what Paul is doing here, right? The early Christians were accused of being atheists, throwing Greek tradition out the window, and just creating this new thing and only worshiping one God. Well, the imminent reality of God's judgment through Jesus meant that accepting this new and true God is a matter of urgency. This is a key difference between apocalyptic preaching, which Adventists are all about, and non-apocalyptic preaching. Apocalyptic preaching always has the end in mind. Paul is here saying, guys, history is going somewhere, and it's going somewhere because of Jesus. Now, the Stoics didn't believe history was going anywhere. And by the way, this is a great gift I think Christendom has left the secular world. The idea that history is headed somewhere, that progress can be made in this world. That idea didn't originate with secularism. It originated with Christianity. Now, Paul sees in Jesus' resurrection the inauguration of the end times. We usually don't make much of a connection between Jesus' resurrection and last day events, but for Paul, that link was as clear as day. The resurrection was God's judgment on the power of death. In Paul's theology, the resurrection of Jesus was also the vindication of Jesus. Jesus was accused while he was alive on earth of having a demon. He was accused of being a criminal. Well, the fact that God raised him back to life is proof that Jesus was innocent with a capital I. And if Jesus is innocent, the only innocent man, then he is the only one qualified to be judge. This is a subtle but profound point, because if Jesus is the only just man, and he intends on judging with justice, then this means the judgment is good news. He isn't like those Greek gods, who are not, in the Hebrew worldview at least, righteous in the least. What a novel idea this is. Not just a moral God, but a God who has overcome, who has lived this life, who has learned from that process of overcoming in this life, and will judge accordingly. We have a victorious God, a God with empathy, a God who understands, a God who has experienced humanity. And he's going to take all of that, and that's going to be the way that he judges in the end. Do you see how compelling this picture of God is, especially compared with what we know about the Greek gods, who were just full of jealousy and rivalry and who had bad moods? Zeus woke up on the wrong side of the bed today. And this man Paul describes will judge in the way of this death-defeating God on the appointed day that God has chosen. Well, why does Paul bring up judgment at all? Because to our sensitive modern ears, judgment seems like such a downer. Some of you are getting bummed that Paul's nice little progressive sermon has suddenly unmasked itself. And some of you out there are probably like, finally, it's become an Adventist sermon. Turn or burn, pagans. I mean, who responds well to being told that you need to make a decision today because God will judge the world? Is this another high-pressure evangelistic sales job? Like when the car salesman says, well, if you leave, I can't promise it'll be the same price tomorrow. Like, is that what Paul is doing here? We have to keep a couple of things in mind. A few things. First, that we're used to waiting for Jesus to come. We're used to our predictions of his return passing us by. Paul wasn't. It was less than 20 years after Jesus had ascended to heaven. Jesus could seemingly return at any time. Second, we need to see this as part of Paul's rhetorical strategy. Do you remember what he complimented them on at the beginning of the sermon? He praised them for being very pious. They were very devout believers. Piety was one of the Stoic virtues, by the way. So Paul introduces the true God to them and says, okay, it's time to be very pious. So it turns out that Paul's compliment to them, while sincere, was also strategic. If they failed to embrace this new God, then maybe they weren't very pious to begin with. Third, Paul knew his time with them was short. He knew he wasn't going to stay in Athens for months or years. This was his one shot, and he's not going to throw away his shot. Anyways, I imagine if you had one conversation to convince a skeptical crowd of something, you might emphasize the urgency of making a decision today also. But Paul's talk of judgment also gave people hope. We've talked about the Epicureans and how they didn't fear the gods, right? Because fearing the gods just makes you anxious and miserable as you try to please them. Just go and enjoy your life and then you die. The Stoics, on the other hand, basically said, embrace the suck. Life is hard. What's important is that you master yourself during this life and then you die. Well, to Paul, both of these paths seem completely hopeless. Your story doesn't have to end with, and you die. For Paul, God's judgment was the path to eternal life. It was good news. It was the moment everything was going to be set right. Both the Stoics and Epicureans were trapped in the imminent frame. They focused entirely on the here and now. People today are largely trapped in the imminent frame also. But Paul showed up talking about God's transcendence. I wonder if more emphasis on the apocalypse, not less, is a possible solution for us as Adventists going forward. But it would have to be a more interesting, more hopeful, more responsible look at the apocalypse than maybe some of us are used to. Just put a pin in that idea. Okay, so Paul meets them where they are, he builds a bridge to them, and then he invites them over by painting a compelling picture of God. Well, finally, he tells them how important it is, how urgent it is that they come over. And that's it. That's Paul's strategy here in Athens. We might be able to add a fifth or sixth step here, but Paul's sermon was cut short. It's interesting that some of us get caught up in the idea of judgment here. We're wrestling with him introducing the idea of judgment. But the people there in Athens didn't get caught up on that. What caught them up, what tripped them up, was the idea of resurrection. That's what ended Paul's sermon early. So who knows what Paul left on the table, what he wanted to say but didn't get a chance to. The happy news is that this sermon was apparently enough and convinced several people to follow this new God. So, yay! Let me begin this next section as we talk about application by saying that Paul's sermon would never be acceptable in Christendom. I mean, can you imagine a conference evangelist rolling into town and the only people he quotes during his sermon are, Richard Dawkins and Ayn Rand, and never mentions Jesus by name at all? Can you imagine that evangelist referring to God as the divine being? We would be horrified, but that is because we're used to Christendom, and it's because we aren't used to the kind of sermon that Paul is preaching here. So what kind of sermon is Paul preaching here? Well, it's often described by its Latin title, Preparatio Evangelica, which is to say, a sermon which prepares people for the gospel, prepares them to hear the gospel. And I think this is a really interesting idea for Adventists to consider today. In Christendom, you could just give people the gospel message, but the early Christians understood that sometimes we have to do something in order to prepare the way for the gospel. Well, Eusebius of Caesarea, he wrote his own Preparatio in the early 300s AD. It took him about 10 years, I think. And in it, he quotes from Diodorus and Plutarch and Plato to explain the history of religion and how in every culture God has planted truths meant to lead them to Jesus. Now, this isn't syncretism here. Eusebius strongly refutes polytheism and explains how it's basically demon worship. And he isn't trying to say, you know what, all religions are basically the same. No, this is a book written for pagan people to help them see how paganism contains a seed of the gospel hidden among the very many weeds of paganism. It's a conversation starter. It's a primer. It's a way of explaining the basics of Christianity in terms the Greeks could understand. I should mention that Eusebius meant this book for recent Greek converts, but I think the idea behind this book could go so much further if we applied it today. I think we have to think along these lines if we're going to reach a post-Christian world. Post-Christian world isn't exactly the same as a pre-Christian one, which is what Paul faced in Athens and what Eusebius faced in his world, but it shares some similarities. For instance, all of our Adventist evangelistic focus in the past is about how to get people from X to Z. And now I think we're faced with having to get people, say, from E to Z. So you have all of these Bible studies and books and resources and all of these things which are designed to help people get from X to Z. But how do we get them from E to X? We do not do a good job of explaining Christianity to a secular world. We do not really do a good job in explaining Christianity in a way that answers the questions people are really asking. When COVID was first ramping up in April, an Adventist evangelist advertised his campaign with the question, "Is COVID the end? Come and find out." Okay, no one out there is thinking COVID is the end of humanity. No one is asking that question. The question isn't really sincere. It wasn't formed from listening to people and saying, "I hear you asking if this is the end." No, the question was fabricated because what we are really interested in is our answer to that question. It allows us to talk about the end times. So the question is a pretext so we can get to our answer. It's not a conversation we are having with the culture, it's a monologue. And I think that attitude is going to have to change. We can't afford to just keep making up the questions that we want to answer. Let me give you an example. My eldest daughter is in this stage where she asks like 1,000,000 questions an hour. And let's imagine she asked me for some ice cream. Then she asked me if she can go fill up the pool outside and swim. And then she asks me for something to drink. And while she's asking me all of these questions, I say, so you're asking how you can help your mom and I today, right? Well, let me tell you. I mean, it's clear I'm not actually listening to her. That's not what she's asking. I'm asking the question I wish she was asking so I can give her the answer I wish I could give her. But I'm in my own world if I do that. She doesn't really exist for me at that moment. I'm not really talking to her. I'm talking to myself. And it won't take her long to realize that I'm not really listening to her. And if I keep doing this as she grows up year after year after year, she's going to grow up to ignore me. When we play this game of not listening and asking the questions we wish someone would ask, we are creating our own reality distortion field around us. We're creating a bubble to live in. So I think this preparation of the gospel thing that we're talking about here is basically veggie meat. It's something to wean people off of something bad and transitioning them towards something better. It's a kind of intermediary place between darkness and light. It's like the dawn. Paul never spoke of God as the divine being when he taught in synagogues. He never spoke of God. He never encouraged Timothy, I should say, to think of God as this Greek unknown God. Okay, that's not the language we find elsewhere in the scriptures to describe God. It's not our usual way of thinking and talking about God. That stuff would be offensive in Christendom, as it would be in many of our churches today. But we aren't in Christendom anymore, and our church language is strange to people who are not in church. You don't often find the word sanctification just bandied about in the New York Times. The goal of veggie meat is to make it taste like the real thing, like what the pagans eat. Ha ha ha, pagans. It's hard to go straight from steak to a salad, and the veggie meat is kind of that intermediate state that you want to get them in as they go towards salad. And we're going to have to find the language of veggie meat if we're going to be successful in the post-Christian world. Now, how might we apply these 4 principles that we've been talking about? Well, application is often where we get tripped up, and I'm going to take a stab at it a little bit, but please understand that we Adventists are thirsting for anyone with answers, anyone with certainty, and we kind of tend to gravitate towards those people. I'm not going to pretend that I have all the answers, and I certainly don't have all of the certainty we need going forward. Rather, I'm actually more interested in the process we employ. Even if some evangelist somewhere stumbles upon a method that brings great success, I mean, people are just flooding into that local church, what's going to happen is that every other evangelist out there is going to copy that method. But no one is really going to understand why it works. No one is going to understand why we are connecting with those people in that place. I understand that sometimes that's how things work. We sometimes invent by accident. But what I'm arguing is that if the understanding isn't there, if the understanding isn't there, the gains we do make will perhaps be temporary or incomplete. What strikes me about Eusebius's preparation, or Paul's sermon at Athens, which is another example of a preparation for the gospel, is that both of them seem to have a better grasp of the other person's position than those people do themselves. So Paul understands how both the Jewish Christian mind works and how the Greek mind works. And I don't get that impression with many Christians today. I think sometimes the world understands us better than we understand them. They see an evangelical bid for political power for what it is. They see that some Christians would rather pass laws enforcing their beliefs than persuade those who don't agree. They see churches clinging to the last vestiges of Christendom because those churches are scared and they're disoriented in this new world and they don't know what's going on, so they're kind of like holding on to anything that seems stable. Well, with Paul, Paul understands Greek history. He understands the religion. A better way to put it might be, he understands the story they are telling about themselves. And I think until we understand the stories people are telling about themselves out there, we will never truly achieve success. Now, what do I mean when I say that the process matters more than the method? What is the process? Well, I think it's the process Paul followed here in Athens. You begin with a deep commitment to God, okay? You then study the world around you with humility, and then you place yourself in a position to be heard. Now, we have that deep commitment to God, I think, and we are increasingly placing ourselves in a position to be heard. But what we often skip over is that middle step, studying the world around us in humility. And I think as long as we lack that humility, that curiosity, that empathy to learn the stories people are telling, we will never get anywhere. All around us in America, people are screaming to be heard. Black Lives Matter is protesting, saying, please hear our story. And the police are often saying, please hear our story. We're often having to do too much in our communities. We can't do it all. Others are saying, please hear our story. Our jobs are disappearing and no one seems to care. There are so many opportunities out there to listen right now. And listening doesn't have to mean that you believe everybody's story, that they're all equally true. It just means you hear it and you respect it. So let us commit ourselves to prayer and to our God and to listening, to asking good questions, to listening more. And I believe that if we do this, we will then be in a position where we are open to receive the wisdom God has for us. Right now, God says, I want you to go and do one of these unknown God veggie meat sermons. Many of our churches might just say no. I mean, that's not how we do evangelism. That's not how we did it 50 years ago. It's not how we did it 100 years ago. It seems wishy-washy. It seems too much like a compromise with culture. We don't have a mindset where we would listen to God and do evangelism like Paul in Athens. Because, frankly, we can't accept that we live in Athens. We're trying to pull the culture back to Antioch where it's safe for us. We also have to be aware of how people hear our language. When we talk about denying self, people today, many of them hear self-repression. When we talk about natural law, they often hear patriarchy. When we talk about Sabbath, they just hear legalists, right? Well, Paul very obviously chose not to use church language when he spoke in Athens. Okay, he didn't use the language of Antioch in Athens. He spoke in the language of Athens when he was in Athens. He uses words they would understand. So let's assume we have the right process in place. How might we practically apply Paul's principles? Woo, that's a tongue twister. Practically apply Paul's principles. Anyways, first I would say this. Ask questions of yourself. If I do evangelism in this place, what am I going to do with the people who show up? What do I want for them? Do I really want to connect with these people and love them, or do I just want to see my church grow? Don't do evangelism because it's expected. Only do evangelism if you love people and love connecting people to their God. Paul calls this elsewhere the ministry of reconciliation, the ministry of helping people restore their relationship to their Creator. Second, I would begin the evangelistic process by putting an ear to the ground in your city. Talk to the neighbors around your church. What's going on in their lives? What are their needs? What are their questions? What are their fears? How do they see God if they see Him at all? What are their values? What are they looking for in life? And when you get up to speak, it's not about getting through the list of items on your agenda. We have to cover this, and then we have to get to this doctrine and this topic. I mean, our goal in traditional evangelism, again, was to move people from X to Z, from being Christians to being Adventist Christians. That still has a place in this world, okay? We can't throw that out. But perhaps it will only apply to certain audiences in certain places. In general, I think the challenge for evangelism is how do we explain Adventism on its own terms, not just as a version of Christianity? In the past, we've tended to rely upon Christian apologists to make the case for Christianity to people. And then we came in and said, hey, okay, now we're going to make our case for our specific kind of Christianity. But how can we speak Adventistly? That's a word, should be a word. How can we speak Adventistly to people directly, to explain to a secular person why the apocalypse matters? I've only been just beginning in this direction with something I call Project Atlas, which was a series of videos I organized in May and will probably do again to explain Adventism directly to secular people. You can find them on Facebook if you just search for Project Atlas or go to my church's YouTube channel at Peoria Adventists. We don't ignore the hard questions in these videos that people are asking, like, why does church matter anymore? And aren't you people talking about the end times? Aren't you guys just crazy people? Why should we take that seriously? How do we know that what is written in the Bible is accurate? How do we know it wasn't corrupted over the centuries? Okay, these are really interesting questions, really fruitful questions, and we answer some of them on these videos. This is my attempt at Preparatio Evangelica. We don't make an appeal for baptism at the end. It's just a way of engaging with the culture. If they are curious to learn more, well, we can go deeper and we can find a path towards baptism through that. You see, Eusebius's preparation was really designed to lead to another book that he wrote, his Demonstration, which is where he went more deeply into Christian belief. So the preparation, the whole point of that book was to get you to the demonstration, which is his altar call, right? So I think if we're learning from Paul in Athens, we're going to do some preparation kinds of evangelism, getting people from E to X, wrestling with evolution and justice and race and the big issues facing our society from a Christian perspective, and just laying the groundwork so people are in a position that they can hear the gospel. We need to focus on getting people ready to hear what we have to say and not just preaching our way down a doctrinal checklist. Anyway, I could go on even further, but I think we'll just save some of that time for the questions that you guys may have about how to practically implement these principles. Last thing I want to do, however, is tell you about some stone. You see, there are some remains of a great fortification in Pakistan called the Ranakot. Sure I'm pronouncing that correct. Anyways, the walls are massive. They stretch for like 16 to 19 miles in circumference. And it's the second largest wall in the world after the Great Wall of China, of course. It's a massive fortress with only one problem. It's quite literally in the middle of nowhere. It was hugely expensive to construct this fort, and to this day, no one knows why it was built. There are no cities nearby. One website wrote about the fort and headlined it with these words, "In the middle of nowhere, defending nothing." Could the same be said about Adventism? Right now, the institutional resources of Adventism are strategically deployed in the wrong direction. We are stretched really thin. So just go to your conference office, look for a map with a bunch of pins in it about where all the churches and schools and stuff are in your conference. 82% of Americans, by the way, live in an urban environment now. And I'm pretty sure 82% of our churches are not in an urban environment. We have a great many small churches in the middle of nowhere. That's not their fault. Okay, it's not. I love small churches. I was raised in a small church, and I want to see them thrive. All right, I pastored one time thinking, can't these 5 people who come to this church drive 20 minutes to the nearest church? I once preached an evangelistic series at a tiny church where 2 members showed up. 2 members. Our organizational mentality is that of the occupying army, trying to spread out and cover as much ground as possible. But I think we don't have the resources anymore to cover every corner of this country, and we're going to have to start shifting our forces at some point. And that might mean putting several pastors together in one city to plant churches. I'm not here to get into the weeds of the details or go down that road at all. I'm just want to introduce the idea to you that we need to start adopting an outsider mentality, an invasion mentality. Look at the map, pool your resources, gather your forces, and figure out the best place to attack. I know this is a tough time. I know it's tempting to retreat into the past, to preach the virtues of Christendom in those halcyon days. In the 1970s, the church I pastor now had over 300 people in the pews. Today we have about 100, and it's painful to attend a church for 50 years and watch family after family stop coming to church, to see once fruitful evangelistic series bring in fewer and fewer people, to see your kids not show the interest that you showed in church. But friends, we are an apocalyptically minded people. We believe the best is yet to come. So why can't our best days be ahead of us? Why can't we look at this situation as an opportunity, not a curse? In Christendom, you could keep things going by greasing the wheels of the machine. Do an evangelistic series this way, you pastor this way, don't go to movies. I think that about covers it, right? It was stable, it was conventional, but now we have an opportunity for creativity, to rethink things, to not just maintain our traditions, to not just be a cog in the machine. In other words, times of uncertainty are the best opportunities to exercise real faith, real dependence upon God, to pray deep, heartfelt prayers, to love in messy, unpredictable ways. Welcome to Athens, my friend. Let's get to work. Father God, I don't want to look at living in Athens as a curse, but as an opportunity that you have given us. You have moved us to this new world, and there are people out there who need to hear the gospel, who need to hear some good news, just anything, some good news. But best of all, Lord, the gospel is true, and it will change their lives, just as it changed the lives of the few people that Paul managed to reach in Athens. We can only wonder, Lord, what would have happened if Paul would have had more time in Athens, what fruit would have been born there. Well, Lord, we have an opportunity to find out, because we're in Athens, and we're in Athens to stay. And we believe that you've called us to this moment. You've gifted us. You've given us this moment. And Lord, we don't want to spend this moment wishing we were somewhere else. We don't want to spend this moment complaining that this world isn't as good as the world that we left. Lord, help us to mentally, to spiritually be present here, to be a part of what's going on, not just at the fringes. Lord, help us to adopt that underdog mentality, that outsider mentality, that invader mentality, looking for openings like Paul was looking for openings as he was walking and looking at those idols, or looking for something that he could use, some way in to be able to speak to people, to speak to the culture. Lord, help us to be good listeners, and help us to have courage and hope, because you're not done with us yet. We have great days ahead of us, Lord, so long as you are with us. And we beg you to be with us, Lord. Future is not going to be one we know because some talented preachers have some good ideas. It's going to be one because your Spirit is with us. So help us to be open to receiving your Spirit. Help us to be open to whatever suggestions the Spirit will give us, to not limit him by the narrow scope of our past, but to say, okay, we're in a new land with a new people. Lead us however you want to lead us, Father. Lead us however you want to lead us. We are ready to march. We are ready to go. We give this all to you. And Lord, with the faith of Caleb, we look at this modern Athens we find ourselves in, and we say, give us this city for you. Give us this city for you, we pray. In the name of Jesus, amen. Thank you guys so much for joining me for this seminar. I hope that it was a blessing to you. I hope that it got the old rust worn off those cogs, and we start thinking, we start having conversations in local churches about things that matter, about what we're going to do in our neighborhoods and in our communities. I know you guys have great conference leadership there, and I'm sure they are going to support you in every way that they possibly can. Start asking those questions. Don't be afraid. Trust in God. And read your Bible. Read the story of Athens over and over and over again, and let those principles that Paul is teaching here, that he's employing here, just kind of seep into your soul. All right. I think we got some time for questions. That's coming up next, and I can't wait to get to them in just a few moments. I hope you have some ready to ask. Here we go.
Okay, there. Thank you. Okay, Matt, you really challenged me today, and thank you. And as I said, there are my notes, and it's far more than we could ever get through just with the questions I have, and I know that there are questions that others have. If you'd like to be part of this conversation, please just put us a chat, just a quick little note on your computer or your phone or whatever you have. Send us a text, a chat, and say, Matt, you got to answer this. So here's the first one that I know. I want to come back to what you've been saying about preparation and the process.
Yeah.
You're more committed to the process than any other thing. And my notes say that means I must come with commitment to what I believe, to the God of my life. That's square one. I can't walk into the world lackadaisically, sort of believing. I've got to come really on tune with Christ. Am I understanding you right?
Absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I mean, and that's something we take for granted with Paul, because it's not explicitly laid out in the story, but we know Paul's story.
Yeah.
That's clearly his background. He's angry about the idols, not just because these guys are doing it wrong. He's angry about it because he loves his God so much that when he sees this stuff, it breaks his heart.
I have here that I must love people unreservedly, but I also love connecting them to the one who created them. And that's a combined commitment whenever I get involved in evangelism.
Yep. And that's why we got to transform evangelism from like a thing we do to a people we love.
The second item on my list was to study and listen with humility. Give me some specific illustrations of what you do today to study and listen with humility to the world of Athens.
Yeah. Well, in a larger sense, I'm trying to be very intentional about the news I digest, about the world around me. I've been very fortunate to have a couple of Facebook friends who are very, very good at looking for the thing behind the thing behind the thing, and trying to understand, like, why are people wired this way? Why do they act this way? What are they really looking for in life? But also on a more local level, I would say take as many interesting people in your community, a diverse group of people, out for coffee as you possibly can. Like, if you look at somebody and you say, I wouldn't normally hang out with that person, that's the person you should take to get coffee.
To go spend some time.
Yeah, and just pick their brain. You're not there to preach, right? Just pick their brain, ask them questions. And I guess a prerequisite to that is you actually have to be curious about the world around you. And it's not, look, Avatar was a whatever kind of movie, but the one quote that always sticks out to me was, it's hard to fill a cup that's already full.
Yeah. And if I go assuming I've already got it all, and I'm going to come talk to you, that means I'm there with an agenda, because I've not left room for you to be part of me.
That's right. And I think sometimes we have a very mechanistic view. Like, I'm not in this conversation to develop a strategy of how to convert you. I'm not like, I can use that. Let me write that down. Because then it's not about the person. It's like you're scouting the enemy or something. You're trying to find their weaknesses. Like, you got to be invested in the person.
And so let me just take you a walk around my neighborhood. Halfway around my neighborhood is the man who is the service manager for the local Jaguar dealership.
Okay.
What am I going to do with him?
Well, I think that would be a really interesting person to take to coffee. And I would ask him, if I were sitting down with him, I'd be like, Jaguar, cool car. I'm sure that's what many of the conversations with him revolve around, like, oh, cool, But let's go deeper than that. Why do you do this? Why do you like fixing things? Like, what is it about that fills you up?
You're the service manager. Your job is many times you're arguing, or customers are going to argue with you about something, and you're a point of conflict all the time. You enjoy that?
Yeah.
How do you resolve conflict?
Yeah. But he gets to. That's a great question. I mean, that's a great question to ask him. He gets to solve people's problems, right? He gets to fix their stuff, even if he's not the guy under the car. And it's like, I would imagine there are some customers out there who are in distress because their vehicle is broken, and he gets to tell them, you know what, we got that part in. We'll get it done for you in a few hours, and just see that look on their face.
The satisfaction of your job.
The satisfaction. He made their day.
Interesting.
He took what was going to be bad news and he made it into good news for them.
Okay, 4 doors up from Scott is a lady who has 2 children who are probably 6 and 12. And in COVID time, they're home all the time, and she is not a homeschooler. She is really frustrated, and every time we walk our dog by, she scratches the dog's ears and talks to us about her children. Mm. We don't need to take her out to coffee. We get coffee on the sidewalk.
That's right. And it can be Roma. For those who are watching, it can be Roma too.
Oh, okay. But the conversations with her are typically about your children, the challenges. How are you doing with math? Man, math's always been hard for me to teach for my children. And the conversations go a completely different direction, but they have nothing to do about God.
Don't they? I think that when you love people, and that love comes through in the questions you ask for them, because the questions you ask them ultimately are because you're interested in them, you're concerned for them, you're rooting for them. I mean, I don't know. I feel like Jesus was somebody who was so completely interested in the person he was talking to. Like the way I imagine it, when he's talking to the woman at the well, she feels like she's the only person in the world who matters in that moment. You know what I mean? It's not just kind of like where Jesus is sitting at the well, like, yeah, okay. You know what I mean? Like he's laser focused on her because she matters to him. I think even if you're talking about baseball, I feel like when you treat people that way, there's some of the presence of God there in that moment.
And so the study and listen, the third word there is humility. Well, we've been talking about listening. Let me bounce back to study. What should I be reading? You said you're on Facebook and some other places where you're trying to be an understanding of what's going on in the world around us, but how can I listen broadly so that my conversations are intelligent?
Yeah, I understand. And it's going to depend slightly on the person, depending on what your taste is. I mean, there's novels, and then there's kind of the philosophical novels, like we quoted Julian Barnes, who began his novel, I Don't Believe God Exists, But I Miss Him. Okay, that's not like Twilight. Okay, that's a novel that is designed to give you an insight into what's going on in society. That's like a meta novel. Like it's so I think if you find those kinds of books, if you're into the novels and into that approach, oftentimes those novels will give you insights you just otherwise won't get into people, right? It's not just and I'm not trying to diss the other books out there that you can read just for fun, but that's a novel that's meant to give you insight. He's wrestling with some really big themes there.
When I read C.S. Lewis or J.R.R. Tolkien and think about the people to whom they were writing, the mentality was very Antioch in those days. Is that right?
Yeah. Antioch was beginning to fade. Even G.K. Chesterton, the early 20th century, Antioch was beginning to fade. Yeah.
And so here's C.S. Lewis, and he's writing about Jesus, and he's writing about the sacrificial system, and he's writing about the resurrection and everything. But he's doing it in Narnia, and he's using a lion and talking mice and all kinds of crazy stuff. Is that someone who has listened, who has studied and listened, and in humility is approaching their friends, neighbors, family in an attempt to communicate God in a way that they will love?
Yeah. I mean, you look at the impact of that series of books on the world. It's extraordinary. I mean, there's so many people who, for Christians, this is hard to understand. There's so many secular people, agnostics and atheists, who read those books growing up and only later realized, oh, wait, those were Christian books?
I didn't know that.
You know, and of course, for Christians, it's like, how do you miss that? Like,
but you come
what is he
to
doing?
it.
He's planting seeds.
Yes.
Yeah. He's planting seeds. This is preparation for the gospel, right? So later on in life, when they grow up, somebody can point to that and say, you've read this book. Don't you know what that's really about?
The third word that you used there was humility. If I'm going to, the process requires that I have come with commitment. That means I already know what I'm really believing in. How can I evangelize, though, if I've already got all the answers?
Well, because I think in a way, you have the answers, but you don't have the answers to the questions that people are specifically asking. And I think here's what I mean by this. We know Jesus is the answer, okay, in a very big, broad sense. But we don't know how to connect a questioner to that answer in a way that will satisfy the questioner. What we're often doing is, if you have a questioner over here and the answer over here, we're often asking questions that nobody else is asking, right? We brought that up in today's message. So we're like starting over here and then we're drawing a straight line. Oftentimes, like you mentioned, Narnia is not a straight line answer to Jesus. Like it's got to be kind of the path is it's a little bit winding. You know, you got to go through the metaphor and the imagery of that world. And I think we got to figure out how to formulate the answer. I guess maybe that's a good way of putting it. We have the answer. We got to figure out how to formulate the answer in an intelligible way.
Okay. And part of that is, again, the study, the listen with humility, which means I am really going to listen to you to learn. I'm not coming to you with, as you talked about, I loved what you did, that most of the time we're doing a monologue because all we're trying to do is get you to ask a question that we can answer our way. That, by the way, I came here to tell you about Jesus, and you finally asked the question.
Right.
So you're going to be okay now.
Right.
That I've been thinking about that a lot. And what that does, I'm still walking around my neighborhood, and I come to the couple who have a 3-year-old golden retriever who is having trouble adjusting to other dogs in the neighborhood. And so we talk about the golden retriever. And before we're through, what we're really talking about is the fact that grandma lives at home and she's got major dementia. And they also have a young daughter who is mentally challenged. And the dog is just part of their life. It's just one of their problems. And we end up talking about all of those. And we're not talking. All we're doing is standing there while the dog is saying, "Can we go now?" Right. And we're just standing and listening to new friends.
Yeah.
We haven't solved anything.
Yeah.
Is that okay?
Yeah. That's absolutely fantastic. I wish we lived in a world where a company says, man, we need to hire more Christians because Christians are known for their integrity and their honest dealing, you know, and they're going to be loyal to this company. And I wish, you know, neighborhoods would say, man, we want some Christians to move in here because they're not going to steal our stuff. They're not going to gossip behind it. You know what I mean? Like, it can't, what we do as a church cannot just be these events we have in these facilities. I want them to look out the window and say, look, there's Dick walking. Man, I'm so glad he's walking through our neighborhood. You know, and they're happy to see you coming.
Yeah.
And it's not like, oh no, there's that evangelist, you know, here comes the sales job, you know. No, he's a real person.
One of our, to go around the neighborhood a little bit farther, we have one couple that comes from a distant country where their God is very different from a Christian God, and they are very committed to their God, and they don't want to have anything to do with us because we are Christians, and therefore we are a threat to everything in their world.
Yeah.
But the other day he had more grass cuttings than would fit into his green barrel, and so he came over and very tentatively said, "Hello, may I put some grass in your barrel?" And now we've got friends.
Yeah.
Grass
just
friends.
like that. Grass friends.
Where it's totally safe. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things I heard from you, is that I've got to be a safe conversationalist with my neighbors.
Mm-hmm. Yep. That does require great humility on our part. Great humility. Because we just want to fix it, oh, you're smoking, let me take that cigarette away from you. You're drinking, let me take the bottle away from you. I'm going to fix you. Just come to me. We'll fix you.
And we'll get you cared for. And here's one. I've got somebody who is an agnostic. And I guess the best way is, I just don't want to believe about God. How do I bring them one step closer to the gospel?
Honestly, I think being an agnostic, by the way, when Paul talks about the unknown God, that the word in Greek there is agnostic.
I know.
Right? To unknown God. And I think, first of all, I compliment them on their honesty, because they're wrestling with something very hard. And I don't think it's a fault to say, you know what, I just don't know. I'm wrestling with the data. I'm wrestling with the evidence. I'm wrestling with these experiences. I just don't know. And that's okay. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm thankful that you're open-minded, you're open to the question, and hey, you came to an honest conclusion. I'd love to talk with you about it some more, but I think at least let's just start there and say thank you for being so honest. It's easy to get kind of pulled into a fundamentalism of one stripe or another, because we all want to be hyper certain, and it's like, it's okay to be uncertain about something.
Okay, so I'm pastor of a small church. And one of my neighbors is an active marijuana dealer, has his own little store, and is very much into all that. And I've been spending time out in his front yard talking with his Rottweiler and my Kuvas. And as we talk dogs, we talk marijuana, we talk prices, we talk what's really selling today and how are people using it. And some of my church members are concerned that I have morally compromised. Help me work that through.
You remind me of a Jamaican Adventist I knew growing up, who said that he was in the police force in Jamaica, and they would confiscate people's marijuana and throw it in a big pile and burn it. And as they did, they would go, Does that make him a bad Adventist?
I don't know. I've been in Portland several times where I didn't have to go. I didn't have to buy anything. I just had to stand by the bunch. It's pretty bad.
I think, I know there's concern in churches about losing where we've drawn the boundaries in Christendom. But keep in mind, way back when, the boundaries were you can't go too deep into the water on Sabbath. I mean, obviously, the concern many members are going to have are, we can't just abandon all of our positions, blah, blah, blah. And depending on what they mean by that, that's certainly true. But I think we're going to have to learn to be a little bit more flexible coming into Athens. You're going to have more and more weddings that are going to be between Adventists and non-Adventists. They may be Christians. They may be great Christians. They may have so much in common and live a very happy life. But that's not a match the church manual smiles upon.
No.
You're going to have situations where as marijuana becomes more and more frequent, where people are going to be partaking of that. They may come in the church reeking. You're going to have these kind of messy situations that are very black and white views in Christendom would not want us to have anything to do with. But now those situations are going to be forced upon us in Athens, and we're going to have to figure this out.
And one of the questions that's come on our chat right now is, what are some of the things that the local church needs to let go of to adapt to culture? And then, of course, the other side of that question is, and what are some of the things that we must never let go of?
Yeah.
And it's interesting that those answers change by culture, what part of the country you're in, what continent you're on. Is it okay if those shift a little bit?
Sure. it's necessary that they shift a little bit. I know that that's an important question. I'm always hesitant to answer it because I feel like it puts the spotlight on practices. And as I said in the video, I'm more concerned about process. So if I say, well, we should get rid of the A, B, and C, and we should keep X, Y, and Z, people are going to say, okay, well, let's drop A, B, C, let's keep X, Y, Z, and we're good now, right? And it's like, yeah, but we haven't learned.
Yeah, I've got D and F, and now what are we going to do with them?
Yeah, right. Right. So, I mean, I obviously there are some non-negotiable things that the local church should not let go of. As we talked about in the beginning of our conversation, our commitment to Jesus and wanting to see his name glorified in this world is a non-negotiable thing.
That's a non-negotiable.
Church.
Yeah, that's going to be a crucial non-negotiable. We're not going to mess with that. Yep. One of my good friends is a Hare Krishna, and he's public relations director for Krishna Consciousness International. And when we talk about Jesus and we talk about his religion, and we discover that time and again, some of the behaviors are very similar. And he uses one name and I use another, but the more we have talked, the more we find things that are in common and worth really agreeing and cheering about.
Sure. Yeah, there's definitely going to have to be a rise in religious literacy for Christians. I mean, as Christianity dominated the culture, we didn't have to know anything about anybody else.
Yeah. Now we do.
We specialize in denominational knowledge, but now I think we're going to have to be more and more aware of it. Stephen Prothero wrote a great book, and I want to say around 2006, called Religious Literacy, and he goes through. He teaches at Boston in Boston, and his basic thing is we need to understand world religions. He's not writing as a Christian. He's just writing as a social scientist. We need, because on 9/11, a Sikh man was killed in, I want to say Arizona, because people thought he was Muslim.
Right.
It's dangerous. This ignorance is dangerous, and it's a more cosmopolitan country.
One of the things that you said at the beginning today, you were talking about Paul's illustration of Jesus is a judge who can be trusted. Because he has lived, gone through what we have gone through, experienced it, and gotten victory over it. You can trust this man. That's an interesting vantage point in a world where judges are, by basic assumption, I can buy the judge. If I get the judge who believes the way I believe, then he's going to judge the way I believe.
Right.
That's not true. Jesus doesn't allow that.
Yeah. I think Paul's interest is maybe in the suggestion of who would you rather trust to judge? Somebody like Zeus, who's so far up the mountain. Yeah. Or would you rather have?
Yeah, he was so far up the mountain, he didn't know anything about what you're doing.
Exactly. He can't relate at all. Or would you rather have somebody who walked in your shoes? That's great news. Oh man, I want a judge like that.
A Christian, most of what we hold on to is simply a reaction to things of which we are afraid. I heard you say that. Am I quoting you fairly correctly?
Yeah, I would agree with that statement. Maybe not most. Much of what we hold on to
is a response to something we're afraid of.
Yeah.
Give me a couple illustrations. Because I found that I put a big star by that on my paper.
Yeah. You look at some of the kind of the household codes we have in church. Somebody may say kids can't run into the sanctuary. Why? Because we're afraid that we may offend the majesty of God. Why can't people go swimming?
Yeah, I thought it had something to do with scissors. Never run with scissors. That's right. You can only go in so far. My mother was very much into that. We lived in Puerto Rico when I was a kid, and Mom would let us go to the beach, and we could collect seashells that were on the shore but not in the water. Right. And then it was, okay, you can take your shoes off. And then it was, okay, you can take your socks off. And then it was, you can wear shorts, but not deeper than your knees, okay?
Right. Right.
That was a very fluid set of rules.
Yeah, right. But in Palestine, you had the Sabbath boundary stones, around the city. You can only walk so far in Sabbath. Why? Because we're afraid of breaking Sabbath. So we've got to legislate out of fear. The real concern, obviously we want to be concerned not to break Sabbath, not to, hurt our neighbor, these kind of things. But I think, I don't really think we do our best work when we're working out of fear with God.
I want to take you back to that wall in Pakistan. Really intriguing.
Yeah.
The wall that is busy guarding nothing.
Yeah.
There must have been something there at one point.
One wonders. There's no cities. There's no strategic geographical spot nearby that needed to be protected, like a pass, a Kesserine Pass or a Thermopylae. There's.
But it's interesting as I look back to early Adventism and early Christianity. I come from a Mennonite background where we knew exactly in Mennonite theology, we knew it was a behavior-centered theology. My early Adventism was a behavior-centered theology, where we knew where those boundaries were. But the older I get, the more gray I get between the boundaries of the black and the white and the yes and the no. And I remember being afraid of the sound of drums in church. And now I celebrate a good drummer. Does that mean I have really sold the farm?
No. I think we got to be careful about judging people's journeys. I mean, some people need to chill out. And some people may come to the conviction that they don't want to hear drums or go swimming on Sabbath. And maybe we can quibble about, well, that specific thing, that's not biblical. You don't have. But if that's where they feel they need to draw the line for their relationship with God, let them draw the line.
It's okay.
I think where we have issues is when they legislate it for everybody else.
Right.
People are zigzagging. Like church is not all of us traveling on the same path side by side. We're all in different spots in life. And for me, I started college, King James only, all of that fun stuff. And for me, my spiritual life depended on God grabbing me by the shoulders and being like, Matthew, chill out. You need to look at this stuff a little bit more deeper.
And listen to other people more.
Yes, and listen to other people more. Some people have come from, like a wild, feral lifestyle. And when they get to church, they need the rules. They need the structure.
Right.
And they cling to those things. And you know what? If that's what you need, fine. Good for you.
Okay, so I've got another question for you.
Yeah.
We have 4 prisoners who have been baptized in prison and are all being released now because they need to be out of the prisons because of COVID. They're going to be coming to our church as soon as we're able to meet together. In fact, 3 of them have asked to be among the 25 allowed this coming Sabbath. How do we relate to them? Okay. Because they come from a culture completely foreign from ours. The only Jesus they know is someone they were introduced to in prison.
Yeah. Yeah. Who's Jesus when you're not behind bars? I think sometimes we look at prisoners as freed prisoners, people with a past, as they're people we have to guard. They're people who, we want to get them where we are in the mainstream as soon as possible. And I think sometimes we can look at kind of invalidating their experience. They do have something to teach us. And I would want to hear their story.
I want to stop you right there. They have something to teach us. If I've heard you say one thing in the last 3 days, that's what I've heard you say. That I can learn from everyone I meet. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
And so in a prisoner, I can learn from them? What am I going to learn?
We have a good prison ministries team here. And we have more people involved in prison ministries in our church than any other ministry. And it's not because we have a wonderful, dictator of a leader. It's because they want to. I think sometimes we get addicted to our own affluence. And I think we don't value the freedom we have. And a number of our members, they like going to prison and spending time with these people and sharing Jesus with them. Yes. But also because these people in prison often understand the value of free time. Mm-hmm. They often understand what they've lost. And they've now come to appreciate it.
And many of our members, they want to go hear from their perspective because they realize, yeah, you're right. I do have all of these privileges, and I don't appreciate it enough.
And it's helpful to listen to them because everyone I've talked to has that's one of their vantage points. Yeah.
Yep.
You guys don't know how to spend your time well. Why are you so busy?
Right. Right. Enjoy your families. My goodness.
Why? If I'm out of prison, man, I want to sit with my family. I don't want to go do all that stuff. Come on.
Right. Right.
Oh, man. Matt, our time's up. Wow. 3 days,
It's been a
and it's
pleasure.
just the beginning.
It is.
Words I would use that will now have Matt on their name for me. One is commitment. Another is preparation. I must practically apply Paul's principles.
There you go. There's your tongue twister.
That's right, my alliteration for the day. Practically apply Paul's principles of Athens evangelism. Oh, I want to come back to one. Maybe we need to become a little more gentle about the apocalypse.
Okay.
That's what you said a little while ago. What does that mean?
Yeah.
You told me to put a pin in it, so I've got a pin in it, and I came back to it.
There you go. I mean, I think when we talk end-time events, our concern as Adventists is usually a sequence of events that we want people to prepare for in order to be ready for Jesus to come. Okay. That's all well and fine. I think, but we have to understand that as Paul uses the idea of judgment here, he's not interested in a sequence of events, in articulating that sequence. He's interested in how this idea of Jesus, the one who has lived among us and risen among us, how he as judge provides hope. And I think we cannot miss the big picture here. There are plenty of secular apocalypses out there. People are talking about the end quite a lot. Elon Musk built an entire company around the idea of making humanity an interplanetary species to survive an extinction level event.
That's true.
So it's not an unwelcome conversation. Like the idea is out there. Now, obviously, secular apocalypses differ from Christian apocalypse, but I think sometimes we're so wrapped up in the precise order in making these complicated charts and so on that we are in danger of losing sight of the practical ways talking about the apocalypse is meant to enrich people's lives.
And that takes me back to your comment about the judge who can be trusted.
Yes.
The judge who knows the shape and size and feel of your shoes.
Yep. So when you say, I sinned because, I felt this temptation, and the judge can say, I know how that feels. I know how that temptation feels.
Yeah.
Right?
And I'm here to help you through it. Matt, thank you. Matthew Lucio. And we've been talking about. It's part of what you live every single day as a Christian. God bless you. Matt, can I go to Peoria SDA, or where do I go to find your sermons?
Oh, well, we've got Peoria Adventists is our digital church that we have on YouTube and on Facebook, and you'll find plenty of good stuff there.
All right. Thanks, man. God bless, and take good care of those kids.
Will do.
Bye-bye.